Great. Sorry for the delay. We got all figured out though. Hopefully,
I can add that to my resume.
yeah.
Next question.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our first in-person podium performance session in like 2.5 years. I feel like I've been saying that a lot, like, all these, new things that we're doing post-COVID, but it is really nice to see everyone in person, and we hope you enjoy the snacks and swag back there. And I know you're gonna love the session tonight. So today at CSI Atlantic, we actually had Aisha here to speak to our staff, which was great. And for anyone that attended the coaching conference in April, you may have heard her speak as well. So she'll be kind of building off of that and continuing the tea conversation. So before I introduce Aisha, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. So on behalf of CSI Atlantic, I would like to acknowledge that our offices are located in Mi'kmaq, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Wilas-Tuwiyik peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wilas-Tuwiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship. And we honor Mi'kmaq people who have taken care of this land, and at CSI Atlantic, we show respect for this land and work to make sure we keep taking care of it for all of us. We are all treaty people. And I'll welcome you.
Yeah, and I always just extend it with also an ancestral acknowledgement. And so we also acknowledge that we are all treaty people, including those who came here as settlers and migrants, either in this generation or in generations past. And to those who came here involuntarily, particularly displanted Africans brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. And it is for you that I do this work.
Thank you. So now I'll introduce Aisha. So she just arrived here from Toronto yesterday. So Aisha is a certified health coach and the founder and owner of Meet Moi Health. With over 15 years of experience in mental health, accessibility, and diversity and inclusion, Aisha has used her experience as a strategic advisor and health coach to understand the complexity and intersectionality of the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual barriers that keep people from achieving their optimized health and wellness. Aisha also holds a master's in public policy administration and law, as well as a certification in change management, advanced crisis intervention, and counseling and health coaching. She is also an integral master for the Canadian Olympic Committee of Canada, and most recently, she became a published author. Always seeking opportunities to bring about change, she is also an active member and board of director for the Women Abuse Council of Toronto and the board chair for Healy Group School. So welcome, Aisha.
Thank you. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. I listened to that bio and it always said that I spent a large portion of my life in school as well. I really enjoy school. I love school, but it is definitely. I'm really happy to do this. As I mentioned, this is the first time I've ever come to the East Coast. I've done West Coast before. I know this is, I've heard this is not the best time to come right here, but the weather is definitely way nicer here than it is in Toronto. I left with it being super cold and thought, okay, I'm gonna bring like a jacket, and I'm in a tank top because I'm just that hot. So again, I appreciate all of you with us this evening. I know you've already had a long work day. Anyone who's parent, caregiver, this is like second half of work life. So again, I appreciate you spending the next hour and a half. I promise not to take you longer than you need to be. But I just certainly ask that again, in this space, we're here to learn, we're here to listen. I'm certainly the kind of facilitator that doesn't just believe in talking. People listen and then they leave and then that's it. I am a very interactive and dynamic person. So I might lovingly push people out of their comfort zone, not in a way where like your Fitbit, skyrockets, but in a way where, and some of maybe your Fitbit is like actively raising right now, but one where again, right at the end of it, there is recognition that we all possess power. And when I say power, I need to set the context that it's not that authoritative, like I have rule over you, but power in the sense of that we all have agency to affect change, right? Power comes with a very negative connotation, and I'm really, in this space, I really try to dismantle people's understanding of power because it's received very negatively. So that is when you hear me say that word, again, it's not from an authoritative perspective. It's more from the perspective of, again, recognizing our own agency and capacity to affect change. So the question of the hour, of course, is why am I here, right? I'm here to further build on work that I know is already happening within your organizations, what's happening in the community. This morning, I was with Andrew, who announced that we are officially BFFs, which is super cool. And we've been working together for about 2 years. And certainly one of the things that Andrew has talked about is the level of commitment of the coaches, of the organization to really start to affect change with intention, right? We have, I mean, I don't think there's anyone in this space that doesn't know that equity, diversity, and inclusion has really become a prominent conversation. And we want to get to a place where it's moving past conversation and moving into action, right? With intention as well. And so as John Lewis, the late John Lewis said, I'm here to start that good trouble. I am a disruptor, but in a way that makes sure that it's comfortable, in a way that brings everyone along the journey, understanding that we're all at very different levels, have very different perspectives, very different lived experiences when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion, but that's probably also one of the most powerful things. Because when you have homogeneity, what you get is status quo. And we know that nothing actually happens in status quo, right? A lot of times we want to make these very small incremental changes and hope that we get these big outcomes. And when they don't happen, organizations are like, well, I don't get it, right? In order for us to affect the kind of change that we want to see, you actually have to, kind of blow the system up, right? Now, not in a way that causes stress, not in a way that gets anybody in trouble, but in a way, again, that causes a bit of disruption and forces organizations and us in particular to really be reflective around either how we're either contributing to a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive space, or where we're actually creating barriers, right? Because what I'm going to set out the gate, because I'm a real talk kind of person, is that we have to recognize where we are on that spectrum, right? Either we are a disruptor, or we're willing to, do what we need to do to affect change, or we're maintaining status quo, or we're on the side where we don't see the importance of this work. Not a question I'm going to ask, but we have to be introspective and recognize where we are in that space. So the question as to why you are here, beyond, just wanting to be here this evening, is, as I said, because all of you have a really important and fundamental role in affecting the kind of change that you're seeing within your communities, with those that you coach, those that you mentor, anyone that is, all of you are within, and I think you're with community and provincial coaches, is that correct? In some shape or form. I mean, what is happening out in our communities is real, right? Communities are holding individuals far more accountable, and holding organizations to task, right? And as leaders, as mentors, as coaches, again, you have a real opportunity to affect the kind of change and inspire those to also be catalysts of change in their own space, within their own communities, again, regardless of what position they play. So it's a really nice opportunity. This was supposed to move around, but I'm not quite sure it's not. I'm just a blank, not just a blank slide. But again, so there's a really great opportunity for us to think, to reimagine, to reconnect, and understand what our capacity is in this space when we talk about taking empowered action. So I don't know if anyone has any adolescents or children, and I've heard like anyone who's spilling the tea, which is like it's meant to talk about Boston, right? But in this case, T stands for taking empowered action. And what that means is, again, our own capacity to affect the kind of change that we desire to see. And I really need to also state the fact that when we talk about change, it doesn't have to be these huge monumental effects. That one change, that one behavior, that one action that you do can have a ripple effect on somebody else, that inspires someone to do something, that then inspires someone else to do something else. So be mindful of that. I recognize that in the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion, it can feel really overwhelming, especially when we're in organizations that don't feel they're as progressive as we are. They're not moving, or we hear community members saying, like, it's not moving at the pace that it needs to. It can be really overwhelming and really discouraging, but recognize that as the people, as the individuals, we're actually the mobilizers, right? You can have a policy, you can have a procedure, you can have a practice at play that says that, either supports or doesn't support, but those usually sit on the shelf. And that usually affects systemic and structural change, which is really important, but we know those are deeply entrenched in a much larger, scenario. But we have to recognize that we have capacity to affect the kind of change that we want to see. So the rules of engagement, right? As I said earlier, I'm not the kind of facilitator that just sits, talks, people nod, smile, and then you go about your business. I'm really someone that believes in that interactive dialogue, because it's actually through that sharing, through those discussions that we have, we start to gain a collective understanding of where we are and where we are going to. As I said, our lived experiences, our our culture, all of those things shape our frame of mind. But again, it's really important in this space that we have an understanding of what this looks like, right? So this is a space, a safe and brave space. You are welcome to share as much as you want to share, and you're welcome to hold whatever it is that you need to hold. Again, I just ask that you listen and be willing to hear what's being shared. We are all, again, at different levels when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so be mindful of words, right? Because words really do hold power, but also look at intention. Again, if the intent of us being in this space is to learn and to kind of unlearn, right? Then understand that no one is here to cause harm. We're just here for a shared and collective understanding. And so, I ask that you never weaponize things that people share, because it really does take a lot to be open and honest about things that you might know or that you don't know. I also operate with the Vegas rule. Anybody who's been to Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, whether your spouse, your friends, whatever that looks like. So it's the same thing. What we share in this space is intended to be in this space. And so I just ask that you respect that. And whatever is shared, whatever is discussed, right? We don't always have to be in agreement, but if we're going to, disagree, I just ask that you do so with respect, right? You can agree to disagree, but respect is at the foundation of everything. Does that work? So I'm going to kick things off out the gate. That's what I like to do. And start off with a question. So this might be a little bit uncomfortable, and this is not, you're more than willing to share if you want, and hopefully if you don't have a pen and paper, I think I've snagged a few. There are some back here. I was able to get a pad of 2 pads of paper. I have a little obsession with paper and booklet, so thankfully I was able to get some. But I want you to think about and identify what is your strength in the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? So what is it that you're bringing to the table, right? I'll repeat that. What is your strength in the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion? What is it that you're bringing to the table, right? There's no right or wrong answer, because it's based on individuality. And just to kind of get things going, I will speak to mine. So my strength in this space is really to empower others to see themselves as having agency to affect change, and honestly to be unapologetic for the bold positions that they take when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's what my strength is in this space. It's obviously very different for everyone, but I want you to think about that. What is your strength in this space? Because we all have, again, regardless of where we are in this, on the spectrum of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'll give about 5 minutes for everyone to think about that or write it down. It can be words as well. It doesn't have to be these full sentences. Whatever you need it to be. And part of this one, and you kind of touched on that, is learning and unlearning, right? We have our experiences, we grow up particular ways, we grow up in particular environments with experiences, and so it does shape the way we see the world, the way in which we interact within the world. But we have to be willing to unlearn some of those things so that we create opportunity for more learning and greater expansion, and just how we do, and just how we live life and do things, right? Not in a way that goes against our values and our beliefs, but certainly in a way that we're thinking with broader perspective, right? So I asked the question, how was that for you, right? Because a lot of times it's hard for people to really place themselves in a position to see themselves as affecting change. Was it easy? Was it hard? Was it uncomfortable? Are you still unsure? What was that like?
I think I just struggled because I was like, I think I wrote stuff down that are more like, if there's a question about where your weaknesses in the PossibiliT.E.A, I might have more stuff down there. So it's like, that's sobering. Anyway.
And I appreciate that. And I think that's really powerful, because again, right, I think a lot of us are uncomfortable to say, like, I actually have strength, like I have the ability to affect change. We're not necessarily conditioned that way because it's seen as being conceited or being whatever. But in order for us to affect the kind of change in the way in which you coach, right? You coach because you demonstrated a leadership, a strength, a skill in your particular sport. So that same type of mindset, that same way you show up as a coach is the exact same way that you actually need to enter into the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion, really recognizing what it is that you bring to the table, right? It's not comfortable, but it definitely is important because of who you're interacting with, the way in which you can really transition or change or inspire someone to do something differently or to think differently or to be different or to act differently is quite significant. So don't separate yourself as leaders and as coaches from what it is that you have capacity to do in the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's that those same traits that you bring into that space, the same traits that you need to bring into this space. But I appreciate your honesty. Thank you for that. So again, right, as I mentioned, I am not amongst just coaches, right? So regardless of your level, of your sport, years of service, how long you've been a coach, what this means is that you're certainly all tasked with, and I love a good definition, so I looked up coach. And what it says is that, in the dictionary, as a coach, you're responsible for planning, for organizing, and delivering an appropriate range of sports activities and programs for individuals and teams. It goes a little bit further than that, and I know you do far more than that. And then it goes on further to say that a great coach serves in 5 main ways, and I also know that this list is not exhaustive. That you are a technical supporter, you are a motivator, you're a leader, you're a psychologist, and most importantly, a role model, right? So those are some of the key roles that you play as coaches, right? And so I say this and I really emphasize this because again, your role is really crucial beyond just what it is that you do from the sports perspective, right? That you actually have the ability to affect bigger outcomes, especially through sport. And so I need you again, as I said, to kind of really broaden your understanding of how you're showing up as coaches. What is it that you're bringing to the table as coaches, and bring that into the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So a few months ago, I don't know if anyone had a chance to participate online at the Summit for Life, Summit for Sports for Life Summit. I was gonna say Summer for Life, that's the kind of summer I had. Sports for Life Summit. But I had the privilege of being the keynote speaker. And one of the things that I shared, their theme for their summit was to refine, reconnect, and reimagine sport, right? And one of the quintessential messages that I wanted to share, or that I wanted to drive home in that keynote, which was again centered on recognizing the real capacity of sport, right, as a catalyst of change. I spoke to the fact that once we get, as I said, past the definition of what sport is, that skills, it's competition, it's growth, it's enhancement. If you really look at what sport does, right? Sport is an innovator, right? It's a collaborator. It's a community connector. It's a social connector. It has a way of really bringing people together. If you think about, you go to a kid's playground, you throw a ball in the center, what happens? They literally make up rules and a game, and people are on teams. They're not concerned with, level of fitness. They just want to play. They socially connect. They collaborate. They strategize. They do all these things naturally within the game of whatever the sport is. That is the level of capacity of sport. So if you are all of these things, which you are your leaders, your psychologists, your role models, your motivators, as well as technical supporters, right? Lend that self into the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And think about how it is that you can show up again as a leader, how you're showing up as a role model. How is it that you're motivating others, right? To again, think differently, to act differently, to welcome others into a space. It's so much more than just the sport itself, right? Which is just as important. And I recognize, within our organizations, there's a hierarchy, right? If you're and I'm not quite sure, so pardon me if I'm using incorrect language. If you're a level coach or this coach, I'm not quite sure how that goes, right? And that's important because hierarchy creates structure. But what is also really important to know that within that hierarchy or within the sports world, it certainly tells people where to fit on the organizational charts, but it actually has nothing to do with your level of impact and influence when it comes into this space. Right? That is what you decide. You decide how much impact and influence those around you, your colleagues, your other teammates, your, you know, the individuals that you're coaching. You have the capacity to do so. That's not dictated by the title before or after your name within the sports context, right? I know I keep driving it home, but they say you need to hear something, was it 21 times before it becomes like embedded in the brain. So I'm gonna continue to say, because it's only within this space, it's only with that continued understanding of our respective agency and power to affect change do we really start to show up in that way, right? And understanding that equity, diversity, and inclusion is difficult, right? It's uncomfortable. It's sometimes hard to bring it up, but it isn't always just about, you know, creating an agenda that says, okay, we're going to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion today, and have these. It's also about how you show up. It's also about how you hold people accountable. It's also about your behaviors, what you support, what you don't support, right? Having those really clear understanding of as a leader, as motivators, that makes the difference, that demonstrates you as the catalyst for change, right? And as I said, communities and anyone that's been listening to the news, anyone that watched, I mean, as I said, communities are really taking a hard position. Individuals are taking hard positions, athletes are taking hard positions, and holding individuals accountable where it needs to be held accountable. So we need to be able to be in a position to demonstrate again that we are in alignment, where again, it makes sense, where it does not disrupt our values and beliefs. That we are equally on this journey of understanding, again, our role within this space, right? So now looking at these main three, I put motivator, leader, and role model. So let me define them. So as a motivator, you're stirring up energy, you're promoting or piquing interest and enthusiasm for something. In this case, we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. As a leader, you're taking charge and leading those around you to follow what you're doing. As a leader, you can see how things can and should be improved, and you rally people to move towards a better vision. And as a role model, you're outwardly demonstrating behaviors and or actions that others seek to mirror. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to create 3 columns. One column that says motivator, one column that says leader, and one column that says role model. And I want you to think about, again, how are you showing up as a motivator? What is it? How are you showing up, or how would you like to show up? Because again, we're all in different, you know, spaces within this realm. So either how do you act as a motivator, or how would you like to show up as a motivator? How are you a leader, or how would you like to show up as a leader, as well as a role model, all within the context of equity, diversity, and inclusion. There is no right or wrong answer. It can be how you actually are, or what you would like to work towards. Like, I don't want to touch.
Those things are getting done in diverse places and not posting the same places you know. And then along with that, the filtering. So sometimes you're filtering, sometimes you can see the filtering, but ensuring that you do or other people look at the ways they filter out and ensuring that we're trying our best to work in that consideration.
And once the process, you know, I think you bring up a really great point. Once the process is an equitable process, right? Because the intent is to hire the best candidate, right? And it's really important when we talk about equity, diversity. I'm going to say keep saying it. when we talk about EDI, a lot of times organizations, while it's important to have diverse representation, and we kind of talked about it this morning, diverse representation isn't just based on visual, right? If we understand the full dimensions of what diversity is, then we need to look beyond just at face value and say, okay, well, you know what, I have someone, an Indigenous woman, I have a Black man, and as an organization, we're diverse. That doesn't really mean anything, because if their perspective is homogeneous, then you're not actually affecting change. You're just visually seeing diversity, which is great, but it doesn't mean that it's going to create a fulsome change, right? So once your process, whether it's recruiting, I don't know how athletes come in, I don't know what that looks like, right? But particularly from an organizational perspective, once the process is equitable, then you are ensuring that everyone has had a fair chance. Again, I love the idea of us even broadening. That's something that a lot of organizations are doing. Where are we even posting? If we're posting in the same place all the time, and the same candidates can't fill a spot, then it means you actually need to change the process, right? And expand where we're going. So I thank you for bringing it up, because what's really important in this space, and not that anyone takes, not that equity takes, precedence over diversity and inclusion, and again, something I talked about today, they don't work in isolation, right? So if you don't have an equitable process, or if it's not equitable, then really you don't have inclusion, right? Which is also not diverse. So they really have to work together. But if we do have to rank it, creating equity where it is feasible is kind of fundamental, right? In ensuring that things or people or organizations are diverse, and therefore that then supports a much more inclusive space. So thank you for that. Anyone else?
Could you explain the word equity?
Yeah. So what equity means, and it sometimes, I don't want to say ruffles feathers. What it means is that you will have different groups who do not have the same level of advantage. So when you talk about equality, right? So let me do that first. So when you talk about equality, it means that everybody is going for, so if there's a particular position, right? Equality means that everybody has a fair chance, like everyone can go for the same position. But it doesn't mean that everyone in the back end has the same advantage, right? So equity means that you are bringing different people, different groups up to the same playing level, so that now everyone has an equitable chance of getting a particular position. I speak more in the context of jobs, because that's really where equity plays itself out, right? So it shows up where you might have to elevate or give a little bit more to a particular group or individual, so that they are now all at equal playing field to now go for, again, in this case, a particular job. So that's what equity looks like. It's not that, and for some organizations, for some people, it is problematic, because what it's felt like is one group gets more advantage over the other, which is not really the intent. The intent is just to say, if the marker starts at 5, right? What is it that we need to make sure that those that need that additional support are brought up to that level, and then from there it's equal competition, equitable competition. Yeah.
So most of the time you see job posting, it says, but history is showing that education is something that minorities have received education for 5, 4 years old, kind of working in the field,
Like transferable skill.
Experience that, like you said, instead of skill, how many years of experience that match. So that's how so part of equity is for equity, I think, stocks in the market.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite stocks in the market, absolutely. And again, thank you for bringing that forward. And I think, again, it's really important for people to to understand. The intent is not to give marginalized groups, whether that's women, that is LGBTQ, that is BIPOC, an advantage over. It is to understand that different experiences have different leverage, right? So you'll have individuals who, not based on race, you know, that have only a high school education going against someone who has a master's, but it doesn't mean that the person who has the high school education isn't probably better equipped to do that job. So if we only use education as a marker and not understand the transferable skills that comes with actually having done a job for 16 years, as opposed to someone who just came out of school with the theory, but has no idea how to do the job, that's where you create inequity. So to your point, you would say, okay, well, 16 years of actual experience in this job supersedes, you know, not supersedes, but actually bring someone up to that master's level. So it's creating a bit of a greater balance.
Simple way of exploring. If someone applied for that's not for the person. But I know coach right here, and I see that. That's the easiest way to make sense to all of us here where it from.
Okay.
That point on like a lot of will filter right out based on police. Step back, saying, let's really actually look at everyone who's probably did not go. They don't need this requirement, just cut it out the applicants.
And there's a much larger issue because I mean, anyone who's written a resume or written a, you know, a CV, I'm gonna say, originally from Montreal, I don't know, so CV. Again, it doesn't even speak to someone's leadership. It doesn't, right? It kind of just laundry list. This is what I've done in school. These are the positions that I've held. It doesn't allow for someone to say, you know what, I really get a good feeling, or I really like, you know, how we answer this question, right? I mean, that's the intent of interviews, but I've done interviews before where people rock an interview, they get into the job and I'm like, oh boy, I got it, right? So there's a much larger, which is not what today's conversation is, but there's a much larger discussion around even how to recruit. I absolutely understand where you do have to create parameters, because I'm sure for many of your jobs, I don't know how many people apply, but I can't imagine doing, you know, going through 1,500 applications without doing some level of filtering. But what would help, I don't know, that I feel like that is maybe a realistic number, maybe. But what you wouldn't want is to miss out on someone that could be a huge asset within your organization because they didn't meet, you know, some of the baseline criteria. So what you're seeing again is a lot of organizations expanding those transferable skills. So if someone doesn't have university or degree, but it says that they've been a coach at all these levels, you know, for the last 15 years, that's something that we need to explore, right? Because again, what they're bringing is actual lived experience versus someone who's only coached for a year, but done, you know, tons of years of education. So that's where you're starting to see a little bit of the transition. Circling back to your question, equity not as in stocks, but I like how you said equity in that sense. Anyone else? Motivator, leader, role model?
For leader, one that was important for me was an athlete on the national team. Within our NSO, I can never understand why we only speak up when something isn't right as it's written in policy. So I found that in my job, it's incredibly important to be a leader by being willing to speak up when you don't have it's strictly black or white in policy that has on that's supporting you. It's based on values and principles of the organization, so that you're setting an example that just because it's gray, it doesn't mean that we're not going to advocate for it.
And again, you bring up a really great point in that a lot of times we wait for like ish to hit the fan and they're like, what does the policy say? Or like, what should we do? And we don't want to do that, right? I mean, we see what's happening in various sports when you kind of just sweep things under the rug and then things kind of come up. there is always opportunity. It is not to say that they cannot swing the pendulum. If there's anybody here from Monkey, there is nothing to say that things cannot be changed. But the more that we are proactive, the more that we continue to dialogue, the more that we take opportunity to say, okay, right now, like this is what it is right now. If we talked about this 3 years ago, right, to your point, right, if we even think about pre-George Floyd, because a lot of these deeper conversations, even though the issue of, again, this is what we're talking about, issues of violence against Black men is not new, that was a global awareness around the blatant level of racism. So now we're in a place where we're like, okay, we can't pretend that this isn't happening, we have to have a conversation, right? So understanding that these situations are happening, rather than waiting and hoping like, oh my God, nothing happens, I hope nothing happens, like let's be proactive. And if this is a scenario, what is it that we do, right? And that's why I say that the policies, procedures, they're good, but a lot of these policies are so outdated that you look at them, and you're like, this is not even relevant. Like, I can't even do anything with this. We actually still have to engage in conversation. So I love that. Again, how do we role model? How do we take a proactive approach? How do we, you know, kind of put ourselves out there where we have a bit of power and privilege to say, you know what, I really think we need to explore this a little more, or engage in these conversations, or maybe revisit, you know, one of our revisit our values or things like that, to make sure that people understand what is the minimum baseline around behavior, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, so it's clear, right? There are gray areas sometimes, but there are areas that we can say, okay, this is a gray area, but I think this is where we need, no, this is where we need to move towards or move towards. So thank you. Anyone else?
As a motivator, like try and expose our coaches to more learning opportunities in different spaces, continuing to do that.
And again, learning isn't just about academic, like it is everything. Everything is changing. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I have 3 kids, 13, 10, and 7. And I feel like sometimes I'm going to a Rolodex. Like, you know, like I gotta keep up to speed. I gotta get on the TikTok or whatever, or call a girlfriend who has an older child to understand, like, what does this mean? So it's important. Education in all areas is, again, it's important because we need to keep up, right? We need to keep up what's happening with, you know, who we're engaging with. If we're looking to recruit, right, you know, a new generation, they are very sometimes overly hyper aware of what's going on, right? Long gone are the days where you can just sell a good salary, a good benefits package, and that individuals will come. They want to know what's the environment. They want to know what are your policies, you know, what's work-life balance look like. Like they really hold organizations accountable. So that education piece in many different areas only serves to make as coaches or a staff that much better when it comes to how it shows up on the field. So thank you for that. Knowledge is power. Cliche, but it's true. Anyone else?
I work with a ton of different athletes and coaches, but it all happens in these really, really short bursts. So for me to be impactful, when I work in the motivator role, I need to make sure that I'm able to recognize everyone's needs and desires as an individual for that one-on-one time to be valuable. And then in a leadership position as well, just working really hard to create environments where people are comfortable speaking up and sharing, you know, with the group, and then as a role model to advise them respectively across the whole circle, whatever that takes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I love what you say. You know, there is the collective understanding, but there's also recognizing, again, individuality, right? What works for one is not going to work for another. Same topic, my approach might have to be very different with you than it is with you, as it is, you know, as it is with you. So again, allowing people to see, like, I felt heard, or I really think they understood what I was saying. Again, this goes also beyond the context of equity, diversity, inclusion. How that shows up now when they now engage with someone else, or when they're engaging with their colleagues or their, you know, their other leaders, makes a really big difference. As I said, I don't know that, even as we don't always understand the level of influence that we have on someone, even as adults, but we really do, right? It's kind of like kids where you're like, don't, you know, what is it? Do as I say, not as I do, right? But we don't realize how much we're watched, the level of impact that we have on people. That doesn't mean, again, as humans, that you can't have a bad day or, you know, kind of mess up. But again, what you do after that demonstrates also a level of integrity that someone's like, you know what, I see that individual, right? Thank you.
Probably a little bit of the three categories. I sit on a BMI committee with Andrew, actually, before Andrew just came on board with us. But, so the committee is, you know, a pretty diverse group. I said to the chair, who's the chair of social board member as well. It's but I said, being like, okay, I'm the white guy in the room, so like, how am I gonna help everybody here? So I just said, like, let me know how I can support. So it's just about having, you know, the kind of longer conversation to say, look, I get it, like, I don't know what I can bring to the table, but, so he told me what I can bring to the table. And I support everybody around the table. Because, you know, I know what's at the end, and I don't, you know, put in their shoes and say, no, that's good, just, you know, help us support with whatever we have on the go. So I think having those conversations is maybe uncomfortable first, but and asking a lot of questions too. So it's more of a general comment of the support and motivator piece, or maybe you know, you can say, how can I help this group? And asking the last couple of years, doing a lot of work in this space, asking a lot of questions too, and not being afraid of those questions.
Absolutely. And if you're in an environment where there's a fundamental understanding that we are here to learn, then that safety to ask a question, you know, as I talked about, should never be weaponized. So if you don't know something and you come to me and say, Aisha, I would just like to know, I should understand what your intention is, right? That you just need me to provide a little bit more information so that you have a broader perspective. My reaction should be like, you should know that. And unfortunately, we have reached a time where the pendulum has swung so extreme that we've created a level of fear to a certain degree in individuals asking questions, because you're just supposed to know, right? Obviously, as individuals, we need to be mindful of the way in which you ask a question, how you approach someone will certainly determine, you know, the angle at which you're coming. If you're coming with a level of aggression, if you're coming with that kind of microaggression undermining, that's a different ballgame. Right? And those of us that are in marginalized communities, we can tell the difference. We know when someone wants to ask a genuine question because they just need to know, or would like to know, or when they're coming with a level to kind of undermine or give you that little slight to say like, what's the big deal, right? But the environment is what creates that context. And even if the organization, you know, as a whole isn't where, say, example, this particular group is, at the very least, the kind of impact that you can have from this level and across and below is one where there's a shared understanding that we have, again, a collective, you know, a collective desire to make sure that everyone feels that they have the right to speak up, that they have the right to bring their perspective to the table, their lived experience. And again, that is across the board. There is not one person in this room who shouldn't feel that they do not have a right to say something. Right? Whether they see something, whether they are, or whether they themselves are the victims of, no one should feel that they do not have the agency to say what they need to say, right? So if you are in, again, a committee where it's like, okay, like, thank you, and absolutely, like, you ask me the question, I'm here to answer. That is the best environment, particularly in the space of equity, diversity, and feedback, sorry, that you can ask for, right? So I thank you for bringing that forward. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, again, this will also change, right? And it might be depending on where you're at right now. Maybe being a motivator is where the focus is. They might not necessarily all play out all at the same time. Maybe being a leader is really where your focal point is right now because of what you're seeing amongst your staff or amongst your athletes. Maybe being a role model is something that is, you know, really top of list or motivator. So it's not that they all actively need to happen. Again, the intent is just for us to define and understand the fact that we as but that we are all of these things. You are a motivator, you are a leader, you are a role model. So what is it that you're doing daily in order to, again, inspire others to be motivators, leaders, and role models? Because change doesn't just happen at one level, you actually have to affect it and inspire it on a continuum. All right, so as I said, you know, if you didn't get a chance, what I would encourage you is to kind of keep those columns, you know, something that you can do every 6 months, every year, whatever the case may be, just to kind of keep yourself aware of where you're at. And what it is, it's also aspirational, right? So as I said earlier, it can be where you are or where you desire to be as a motivator. Where is it that you desire to be as a leader or as a role model, right? And so again, as we continue with this, continue with this work, what's really important to understand is that we're ever evolving, right? Nothing stays stagnant. What they say, change is the only constant, right? And so one of the things I want to ask you, right, is, what would you need to change to cultivate, again, that fresh perspective and insight about who you are today and what you desire to be, right? Because our intent is to continue to grow in all aspects, right? Where you are as a technical director today is not where you desire to be a year from now. Maybe you want to enhance a skill, maybe you want to change sport. I don't know what that looks like, right? No one really desires to stay stagnant. We want to continue to evolve. And again, an important question to ask ourselves is, what do I need to change? What do I need to learn? What strategies do I need to implement? What do I need to let go of? What do I need to unlearn so that I create space for that change to take place, right? Again, we're talking right now in the context of EDI, but this is completely applicable in all aspects of our life, right? Because again, if we don't believe ourselves to individually or recognize that we individually, again, possess power, capacity, capability, and agency to affect change, then again, do not be mistaken by the belief or assumption that these issues that are maybe actively playing out within our organization, that we hear, that we see, will change, right? Again, a policy, you can update a policy, you can update a practice, but where do most policies sit? If not online, they sit on a shelf that nobody goes to, and maybe we revisit every 5 years when we do a strategic plan, right? What actually creates change, or maybe 10 years, what actually creates change is everyone in this room. And again, it doesn't mean that we all have the same, level of authority, that we all have the same, end game, but if we're all working towards a goal, a collective goal, then change is actually inevitable. And those individuals that are kind of, dig their heels in the ground, that just don't like change at all, and there are individuals who don't like change across the board, it becomes a bit of an uncomfortable situation, right? Again, the intent is not to squeeze anybody out, but we have to evolve, because what is evolving is our communities, right? Our people are evolving. Who we are now going to be coaching is evolving. So we also need to move within that change. And so what I'm asking all of you here today, again, is to continue to take empowered action, right? And decide if, as of today, you're either going to be the passenger in the seat, or if you're going to be a driver, or if in fact you're going to be the car manufacturer, right? Again, a bit of a corny analogy. When I wrote it, I was like, oh, this sounds good. But you get my drift. You need to decide where is it that you want to be on this journey. That's not for me to say, that's not for your managers to say, that's not for your leaders. That is for you to decide how and where you want to take this work. And so you can't, as I said, if we want change, we can't make these like little incremental shifts and expect these big changes. We actually need to, again, be intentional, take our time, realize that not everybody is where we are, right? So patience is a really, really big one. But again, what we should create that safe space. Create the space for dialogue, create the space for safety, for engagement, so that it allows people to place themselves within your journey, but moving in tandem with you. Again, never means that change will ever be instantaneous, but again, if once people know that change is happening, wherever they are on the change train, eventually they will get there, right? So again, I want you to think about, and I think that you need to share, and it's a question that you can think about, process, but what are you committing to today, right? Because the other part of this work is we can sit in these, great sessions, have incredible conversations, which I absolutely appreciated today. But the truth is, work doesn't happen in this space. It happens after you leave these sessions. That's where change really happens, right? We can dialogue, we can decide what we're going to do collectively, but it's the decision that you make once you leave this door that actually makes the impact. So what is it that you're committing to today? right? Maybe it's continued learning. Maybe it's making this, these kind of conversations a part of our team day. And again, it never has to be these blatant, overt, like, let's talk about equity. But maybe there's a part of it, maybe there's a part of how do I act as a motivator, and asking people within your space, like, how do you see yourself as a motivator? How are you modeling, role modeling? What would you like to role model, right? But what is your commitment today on a roll forward? Because as I said, these spaces, I thoroughly enjoy them and I get a lot out of it. And I hope individuals that participate also do. But change happens the moment you leave this tour, right? And that is based on what your commitment is to self to continue to affect that change. And so again, I love this quote. It says, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the end, right? So it would be very easy for all of us to say, well, we should have, we could have, didn't, very easy, right? But we make decisions based on what is reality at the time, but that does not mean that that needs to be the future outcome, right? So wherever you are today, doesn't mean if you'd like to continue to evolve and grow, doesn't mean you need to stay here. You can continue, on your own personal journey. Whatever happened in the past is what happened in the past, but there's always opportunity to change the ending. And again, it's a continuum, right? Whatever it is that we commit to today might be very different based on what's happening around us in our communities, within our organizations, that has us reframe what it is that we would like to do in the future, right? And that actually concludes my presentation. Comments, any burning ahas? I also realize that it's been a long day, it's an hour and a half, probably an hour and a half past, everyone should go home. There's the young kids that we do before they eat dinner, after school pickup. Not quite bedtime yet.
Any questions or comments? And Bruce or Lance, if you have any questions, feel free to write them down. That would just be paraphrasing,
Oh.
paraphrasing the comments.
Okay,
Because
okay.
the microphone was.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. All good. Great. Thank you so much.
No, thank
Anita.
you.
That was wonderful, and again, always keeping us thinking. Yeah, really appreciate you coming out here and presenting to our coaches and teams.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
I've missed 3 bedtimes, so this is highlight for me. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and a great season. I don't know, is it like a season started? I guess
There's a mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Yeah, we have summer sport, winter sport,
Okay, well, good vibes for everything.
Just gonna clarify one thing too, like, you guys have questions for our